Welcome to Communicate, a conversation for the cool, so just relate. My name's Talk, and the egos, let's take this to the other beers and bread and baby. Welcome to Communicate, a conversation for the cool, so just relate. Welcome to Communicate.
In order for you to understand where I want to go with this channel and my reasons to create an avenue where I can vocalize and speak out on some issues that I'm passionate about, I thought it would be really important to share some of my personal journey and experiences so that you could better understand and follow along with me. Really, the journey started back in 2008. At that time, I had gotten out of high school and decided that I wanted to be a nurse. I had lost my aunt and my grandfather, and my aunt being only 39, and I'd lived with her at the time. I was introduced to the idea of nursing and really decided that was the path for me, especially because I'd always been someone who wanted to help others. I started school. I took all of my electives geared towards the prerequisites for the nursing program. So I did it really strategically to where I could be eligible for the nursing program as fast as possible. So Tallahassee Community College, where I attended, had an excellent nursing program. Applied for the program and was disappointed to find that I didn't get in because I was sure I was going to get in. There was only 50 students allotted to the program. Well, turns out I got extremely lucky, or maybe call it destiny, but I was at the restaurant one day sweeping the floor up in section 10 at TGI Fridays, and I got a phone call, and it was Tallahassee Community College saying that I was student number 51, and someone had just let the college know that they could not accept the position in the program, and so by default the position would open up to number 51, which was myself. So lo and behold, I started nursing school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. The further I got along in school, the more and more I got this affinity towards cardiac or to the heart. Originally, it might have started because of the appeal of the nurse-patient ratios. For example, a normal floor like your orthopedic floor or oncology cancer floor, the nurse-to-patient ratio was 1:6. Sometimes even 8. So, for every one nurse, you would get 6 patients because they're not really high acuity. But if you worked on the cardiac floor, the nurse to patient ratio was 4:1. By the time I graduated school, I had pretty much decided cardiac is where I wanted to be. So I put in my application at Tallahassee Memorial Hospital and went for my interview. Now, I hadn't taken boards yet, but a lot of the other nurses that were getting jobs already hadn't taken boards. They had either worked in that area during clinical, or maybe they were a nurse's aide there prior, or somewhere in the hospital system they had been already and had already established these plans for after graduation. So I thought, okay, I will do that too. And I went for this interview and it went terrible. The energy was weird, and I think I really fed back to that energy, and needless to say, I didn't get the job. And was pretty devastated because, cardiac was where I decided I was going, and there aren't that many hospitals available in Tallahassee. So I decided just to do a search of the word cardiac and see what came up as other job openings in that hospital. Well, when I searched it, I found 2 openings. One was the cardiac ICU, or CICU, CICU as they called it. And then the other one was for a unit called Cardiovascular Medical Surgical ICU. So they called it CVMS ICU. But either way, both words had cardiac in it. I I went for it and decided to put in my application for both the cardiac jobs, having no idea even what to expect. I'd never even set foot inside of an ICU. I decided to write a letter to the manager of the unit and kind of give a little bit more personal touch than just getting a application from someone who had no nursing experience at all. Shortly after sending that letter in, I got a call back and I was offered a working interview. Shortly thereafter, I got a job offer, and the manager asked me between the two units which one I preferred working on, the cardiac ICU, SICU, or the CVMS. I didn't understand really the difference between them at the time, and so I told her I had no preference, and she said that she thought that the CVMS would be a better fit for me. I think on June 9th, I started my very first day in the ICU as a brand new nurse. Quickly, I learned that the unit was all about cardiac surgery. We did a few traumas as well, but I had a pretty extensive preceptorship with the senior nurses and really got to form the basis of my knowledge for 4 to 5 months training just to be able to care for a patient after heart surgery. Now, at the time, we still had a lot of nurses at the bedside who had been in the career for, 30, 40 years. So unlike today, where a lot of baby nurses, as I call them, are around, I'm 34 and I look around and there are so many of, like I said, baby nurses that are right out of school, 23, 24 and green, and don't have that many nurses that have that 30 years experience that are teaching our newer grads. There's a big loss to lose that seniority. So I learned from the best is what I'm trying to say. And I worked my way up all the way to charge nurse. I got really involved at the hospital, and as charge nurse, you got to respond to rapid response or emergency situations, cardiac arrest throughout the hospital. So it really was an honor to be given that, and to get paid 25 cents more an hour. Eventually, I decided I wanted to and was ready to expand my horizons and wanted to try out travel nursing. It had always, I love to travel, and adventure always appeals to me, and really, the money was pretty good at time, and I had found myself in some pretty intensive credit card debt. So it seemed like the rational thing to do. When I left Tallahassee, I met with Laura Brown, my precept that I'd learned so much from. We actually share the same birthday. I met with her and she gave me a gift. It was a candle and it said, "Be you." And she told me, she said, don't let this experience and don't let becoming a travel nurse make you a bad nurse. I went down to Tampa. I started at a smaller hospital that was an HCA, and they had just started a brand new cardiac surgery program. I believe they had 6 beds in the ICU. So I went from an ICU that had 20 cardiac surgery beds to an ICU that had 6. And a lot of their senior staff there had almost equivalent experience as I did in cardiac surgery, mainly because their program was new and they were starting it. So I actually was involved in training their nurses hired into the cardiac unit. So it was a really cool, experience, but what it also was the very first disappointment that I had in healthcare. At least one that really shook me. And I learned quickly what Laura Brown was talking about when she said, don't become a bad nurse. And that nursing wasn't the same everywhere that you go. HCA, being Hospital Corporation of America, or a for-profit hospital, was very different. And I've learned throughout the time that the main difference has been kind of the motivation behind why you're doing it. A lot of providers, and some nurses, they choose that area not because, it's the best that they can do or, have available or is the only one, but because of the money that it offers. It is the higher paying job, but I feel as if the money comes from, unfortunately, the quality of patient care. Now, I'm not saying that as a reflection on the nurses. What I'm saying is on a reflection to the policies and the kind of fencing that the nurses are required to work in to provide the best care. For example, one of the biggest things I noticed was the supply closet and what I had available. You know, if I have a patient with a wound and I'm trying to treat it, and over here I have every single wound care product that I could imagine, 6 different shapes of gauze and 10 different types of tape, and on this unit I have maybe 2 pieces of gauze and 2 types of tape, and that is going to directly affect the quality of care and that I can give to that wound. Minor example, but unfortunately has a bigger expression than that. Their big difference that I noticed was their charge nurse. The charge nurse had gone from not this, team role where it was when I was in Tallahassee. The charge nurse was there to back up all 10 nurses and take care of, really have an overview of all 20 patients. But worrying about the entire unit while you're worrying about your staff, but while also doing the administrative things like talking to the nursing supervisor and making sure that the flow through the unit, or AKA how many patients are coming in versus how many we're transferring out of the ICU, making sure that we have beds and availability, accommodating as many critically ill patients and our cardiac surgery patients that we could while supporting our team. When I was in Tampa, I realized that their charge nurse position took less of a role, had less of a priority of, working with the nurses or all 20 patients, and really took a big chunk of their responsibilities and put it towards administrative work. I mean, just running reports all day, and I can't think of them all now. I was never a charge nurse, but I can just remember their inability to be at the bedside or be as much help, as they could be clinically because of their administrative duties. Now, all of them, the nurses that I worked with, were great and supported when you could, but let's not lie, the charge nurse role was very administrative, and often they were not able to provide the support to the team or the patients or to the quality because they had to do what was set upon them by administration. Let's satisfy, the nurse manager. The difference of money can do. It's why are you doing this? Are you doing it for trying to make as much money as possible, or as I had experienced with my previous hospital, was everyone just trying to do the best for the patient, and money, was a bonus. That was real, like I said, my very first realization that, hospitals aren't the same everywhere, and that standards of care are different too. Oh, I extended my contract there and shortly decided that I had to go work at Tampa General Hospital, because Tampa General is where we sent all of our patients who got too sick for us to take care of. We would send them out to Tampa General for them to take care of. So of course, I wanted to be in the place that had the most critical patient. I wanted the patients to be sent to me, not away from me. And so I applied to their cardiac surgery floor and got the job. Now, this was a big deal because, yes, I had cardiac experience, but what they had is advanced cardiac circulatory devices. Now, what that basically means is they had a lot of advanced technology or devices or machines that could do the function of the heart and support it when it was failing or stopped or being, operated on. This is when I first was exposed to the concept of transplant surgery and got to participate and help recover patients after cardiac transplant and after lung transplants. So that was a really big growth in my knowledge. I really loved it there. It was a teaching hospital as well, so it was associated with the university in Tampa, and it was, it was the big shot for the area. Not to mention it was on Davis Island, which is an island, and all of the windows of the hospital you could look out and see the ocean. So come on, who wouldn't want to work there? I had kind of during this whole time gone back to school online just to bridge myself over from my associate in science, which is how I became an RN, to actually getting the bachelor's, the BS in. And I'd done it online kind of during my transition. After I had finished that, I decided to enroll and go further and apply for the DNP program, and was accepted. So right about the time that I got accepted, I got fired. Now, I'd only been fired from one job before, and that was in high school. It was Brugger's Bagels, and I should have gotten fired. I told my mom that I had to go to work, and that's why I wouldn't be home. And I told work that I was sick and I'd be at home. So when my mom called the job to talk to me, and the boss said I wasn't there and should have been at home, well, the rest of the story. That was the end of my job. Well, in this situation, the basic story is that Tampa General Hospital, when you sign their policies, is that it is a strict no profanity rule. And so this meant that you could not use profanity in any what's called a showtime area, or you would be terminated. A showtime area was considered any area that a patient and staff or family could share. Now, it's been a while, and if I recall, I'm pretty sure this conversation happened in the supply room, which patients and families do not have access to. A nurse had agreed to switch a shift with me so that I could go to my family reunion, but at the time we were transitioning from these paper schedule change request to an electronic form. So everything that you put on paper, one person of the two had to go in and enter it electronically. I hadn't really learned how to do that yet. And eventually they shifted and said, okay, the only finalized changes are the ones that are in the electronic form. So we had the paper, didn't yet have the electronic. So about a week before my reunion was planned, I went up to the nurse in the supply room and I was like, hey, did you get the chance to accept and confirm the schedule change? And she told me at that time that, actually, I can't do it. My attitude got the best of me, and my mouth did too, as sometimes it does. But more or less, I called this nurse a vulgar word and was overheard by another nurse on the unit. The next thing that I know, I'm being called in, asked to get all of my stuff and meet the manager. Now, I was really confused. I hadn't thought that I had done anything wrong that I was aware of. And when I met the nurse manager, she's like, something has come to my attention and we have to go meet with HR about it. I believe as we were walking, she kind of gives me the background of the story, and it was that Nurse A had told the manager that I had called Nurse B this vulgar word. And given that, it was a no profanity thing, by God, it was such a huge deal, right? So when hearing this, and I immediately wanted to laugh because I was like, this is really what you're spending your time on, chasing down a he said, she said, instead of focusing on the quality of care and helping out your staff in the ICU. Okay, fine. I replied with, listen, if that's what they said, I said, that's what I said. Not thinking or considering the fact that there was a little bit of, black and white writing that did say, if I use profane language, I would be fired. So, basically, I gave my admission to it before even walking into the HR, foot and mouth. But to this day, I'm glad that I told the truth. So, I was put onto administrative leave and told to go home, and they would elevate it through several phases of investigation, basically. I made it all the way up to the third phase. I spoke with the chief nursing officer at the hospital. I even called a lawyer. I mean, I was so bummed out. Like, this was a dream job, and like, it was supposed to help me so much on my journey. And I had been removed over a petty, a petty situation that should never be the focus of, patient care. Now, I will say this is the most toxic unit that I'd ever worked at. It was just a very toxic environment. I had verbal altercations with, even the providers when patients come out and they're like unstable. And we had one surgeon who they called code grays on, which is like a violence report. And eventually he was also fired and removed from the hospital because of his aggression and hostility and violence. And, I'd had him cuss at me over a patient before. I reached for a bag of fluids and I grabbed fluids and he was like, "No, the effing albumin." Something along those lines. And he never saw any, ramifications because of it. Either way, I stayed at home for 3 months while these investigations went on. Very petty. Even the friends that I still had in the unit, were saying that like they saw one of them texting me one day and walked by, and next thing you know, they got called into the manager's office, and the manager asked them, "Have you been talking to Caitlin? What has been said?" And I just still to this day find that just so amusing because there are so many other things to focus on in healthcare. All right, done with that one. So Tampa General didn't work out. I earned my MSN. At that time, I really, got passionate about this idea of what I wanted to do with my career. I loved cardiac. I ended up actually starting this tattoo that I have here. For a long time, used to just be the heart. And I got that while I was right after starting the program, and got the physical heart, the anatomical heart. But inside of it, I had the heart chakra put. And I thought that it was a beautiful representation of kind of what nursing or patient care should be about. And it's the blend of, science and like the spiritual sense, and really embodied kind of to me the definition of what a nurse really is. Our doctors, our MDs, they know the science and the patho, and nurses, we are taught a very holistic, like patient-centered, whole approach, and really are the ones there at the bedside, and we're there with our hearts, and we're there caring for you with our hearts. So it was just a really beautiful thought and permanence that I wanted to have on me and to represent where I wanted to go from here. And was waiting just to present. I'd finished collecting all my data and had no physical appearance that I had to make until later on in the year. And so when the pandemic hit and I saw what was going down in New York, I made a phone call, and the next thing you know, I was on my way to New York. Part of it was, the adventurous, and also the wanting to help save people, or even the nurses, more than anything, from just what I was seeing of what was going on. I just couldn't stand thinking about what the nurses were going through. I had to go. And also, I think the biggest one was heard about all these people who were apparently jumping off the tops of buildings, committing suicide in hospital garages. Now, this did happen, I think, to one physician, emergency services physician, but the way that it was made out is that people were just like jumping off the tops of buildings everywhere. And honestly, like, I had to see it to believe it. So I went to New York. It was an experience unlike no other. It was a scary experience. It's unlike anything I've ever seen at any other time in any other place. Really, it was during that time where another huge shift in me happened. I was actually working in the ICU in New York doing the COVID response, taking care of patients on ECMO, because when patients had the severe form of COVID, they would quit breathing or go into respiratory failure. And the only thing that can truly support the lungs and the heart and do the oxygenating and the pumping for you is the ECMO machine, or kind of like the bypass machine that they use during surgery. On the day of my graduation, was working in the ICU. I missed, like an entire celebration or any live graduation. It was just a simple little whoop, there went my name on the screen at that designated time, and I was, working in a COVID unit in New York. I was also shocked and got the rug pulled out from under me as far as my faith in healthcare. When I saw that our governing bodies like CDC or FDA, now these are sources that I was taught throughout all my schooling to use as the authoritative, like final guidelines on like how patients should be treated or what's the best thing to do. And when I saw the CDC make a different recommendation that was like politically swayed, it blew my mind, because never in a million years did I think that could happen. Evidence-based practice is what the nurses do. That's quality improvement. That's the focus of all public health, is using the evidence that we have to figure out the best possible solution and then apply it. Our government and in our senior medical bodies, that money and politics and other agendas do affect patient care. And that really was the straw that broke the camel's back. So I thought. I continued after that to follow the COVID crisis. I worked in Arizona. I went back down to Florida before finally deciding my mission was bigger, and I decided to move to DC, just thinking that a bigger scene, a bigger city life would have bigger opportunities. So I went to Howard University. That is, one of the first African American health institutes that was created and still remains to this day, a predominantly Black institution. Great experience to get to work culture that is different than mine, because there was a lot of Black Lives Matter movement had really kicked off in the time, and I really wanted to be somebody who, could establish connections and find the ways to connect. So I was really pleased when I, had the best time ever and really, got to meet and talk to a lot of different people. Enough was enough. I'd bounced around and done the COVID crisis thing. And it was time for me to actually use my degree and go be a nurse practitioner already. Well, Johns Hopkins was nearby. And it's Johns Hopkins, rated, I think it was first in the nation, third worldwide, only a couple years ago. Also knew that during the pandemic, all of the numbers and all of the statistics, everything was Johns Hopkins. So, you had, CDC and the president, the governor of New York, and then you had Johns Hopkins, and those seemed to be the big players of the game. And so I wanted to go to Johns Hopkins, and I wanted to see what it was about. I applied. I got the job as a cardiac surgery nurse practitioner. I remember calling one of my colleagues back. He was actually more like a mentor. Kept him informed of my progress, building my empire, as we had called it. And I remember when I told him about the job at Hopkins, he said, "Girl, you got the best job in the country." So I was very proud. Well, immediately it started to go south. I, within a week, was reprimanded for my approach speaking out, which, professionally speaking, I could have gone about it a different way, but I had been a travel nurse or a per diem agency nurse for so many years where, no matter what hospital I went to, my focus was the patient, and I got less concerned about their hierarchy of the hospital. But when I started at Hopkins, I was quickly, put in line about the hierarchy and kind of the level of the ways to take conversation to the next level of authority, before just thinking that I personally could take the authority and speak up. I stuck it through. They always say your first year when you transition, imposter syndrome, all these different things, and I'm not a quitter. If anything, I will not quit. And so I stuck it out. I, did what I did. I tried on improving, and throughout my journey of becoming a new nurse practitioner, I kept getting frustrated because I would be pushing for better patient care or something for my patient and would be stopped with a hard no or just a stop sign. You can go no further. And being the, philosopher and researcher and scientist and nosy that I am, I wanted to know why. And I always need an explanation as to why I shouldn't do this. I'm supposed to ask why so that I have the same rationale to use when I see the next patient. That's how you become better providers, is understanding the consequences and effects of every action that you take. But I kept getting the answer, it's politics. It's political. So I would say, why can't I do so-and-so? Why can't we do this? Why are we doing this? What? This seems a little bit weird. Why are we doing it this way? And constantly it's politics, it's political, it's policy. It bugged the hell out of me. Many people asked me when I was going through school what I was going to do with my degree. And I always replied with, I'm not sure yet, but I know for sure it's not going to be policy. It really kind of bothered me and broke my heart to see what our healthcare system has become and how money and agenda and politics have begun to influence patient care so much. You might think, why does this even matter? Well, you have to think, if you're a patient, it's going to matter. We're there when what? Your life is in danger. So when there's a threat to your life, nurses are there, but also so is money and power and governmental bodies. And no matter what, the one with the higher authority wins. And I decided that I couldn't be a part of it anymore. I've heard a lot from different people about, they'd want to leave the bedside before, they're fed up with this or that, but they don't do it because they feel as if it's an abandonment of the patient. I mean, patient abandonment is actually a charge that a nurse can receive. If I take report on a patient and assume responsibility for them, and I leave before another person is responsibility, then legally I can be charged with patient abandonment. And I kind of considered leaving the field the same thing, okay, well, I don't like this, but if I don't do it, then I can't make that one patient's day better. So I flipped it to the positive side, and I'm like, well, and I get that a lot too, is saying, well, no, you might not can make changes, but what you can change is that one day for that one patient. I just got fed up. I felt as if the more that I just complied and, shaved down my values and fit into the right box, so that I could maintain this position and status and even profession, it got very unauthentic and not me. I didn't want to just fit the mold or just be this way so that I could have that job or have the money or whatever the other reason. So I made the decision that I would walk away because that would be the only way to have an outward action to express how I was internally feeling. If I felt so passionate about healthcare change and I don't support this, we're not doing this right, I don't think this is right, morally this is not right, and I stayed in it, that is a conflict of my words and my actions. And I don't want to be questioned or not be who I am. And so to stay true to myself, I decided that I had to walk away. I did also play the little trick on my brain and decided that I was gonna go to Costa Rica, and that going to Costa Rica for maybe like a holistic 4 or 5 month stay, save my money, low vibe after all the COVID response stuff. That would be a good enough reason to leave Hopkins. So my other plan is I was going to write a book because I was so passionate about healthcare and how I thought it should be, so I'll write a book. I remember, this just popped up, but I remember my attending at the time told me, when he was trying to convince me not to leave, told me that, don't you think people will want to hear about healthcare change from someone still in healthcare? Now, that's pretty true, and I haven't jumped ship completely, but it was also just another ego stroke. It was thinking that I wouldn't have credibility or authority or anything if I walked away from the profession, that I wouldn't be relevant. But it's not about me being relevant, and it's not about how much money I made, and it's not about having the best job in the country. It's about being a nurse and an advocate for patients and an advocate for public health and an advocate for humanity. And that is what I wanted to stay authentic to. After starting Hopkins 2021, I left, about a year and a half later. Ended up not going to Costa Rica, actually going through really unstable living and housing situations, to where I bounced around in Maryland to West Virginia, my mom's Airbnb that was empty, back to Maryland to live with my grandfather, and kind of spent these last holidays really living in my uncle's old room with my grandfather. I shifted away from writing the book because when I write, it is a very long process, and who has that kind of time right now, and realized that I would be a lot faster and effective if I just talked and used my words. We have many outlets, but social media has turned out to be one of the most important as far as the human connection that's going on, especially after social distancing and quarantine. Everybody's on social media, and therefore your ability to have a wide audience lies in social media. And that is really the transition that I went away from the book and started focusing on creating a channel to where I could speak about the things I was passionate about and voice all of my concerns, without any kind of conflicts of interest or any biasness or financial disclosures needed. I, am currently not employed by a hospital, so I have the freedom to say anything that I want to say without reprimanding. I'm not here to put down anything. I'm only here to just share truth and insight and use the knowledge that I've gained throughout my experiences and my education. Direction that I'm wanting to go with this channel is, yes, an area where I have the ability to talk about these things that I'm so passionate about when it comes to patient care and healthcare change, and also just to help bring perspective about some of the current events that we're seeing now. A very big connection between healthcare, government, the people, and the providers that I don't think people understand the severity of. Your life is what you value most. And in healthcare, that's what we are there to preserve. But when it comes under the influence of government, financial motivation, and shifts more and more away from high quality patient care and evidence-based practice, the more dangerous our world can become. I had always been taught only way to really make change is to, one, start locally, so you start small in your community, but two, it's political involvement. And you know, we are governed by the laws made in the art of politics, or the science, political science. Unfortunately, the area where you can combine the two, it's very much of a, just like, you know, hospitals can be, the education system, you know, is as well. And it's very, very much based on a hierarchy. So to shift and get politically involved or specialize in that area, I mean, either way, it's going to take many, many moons of me doing this, you know, and gaining the expertise and knowledge and exposure to actually have any impact or be in an arena where my voice could be heard. Now, I have begun to pursue the health policy route. Policy is now something that, you know, I advocate and focused on because I'm truly about change. But especially not having a political background, many of the things that I plan to share on this channel are just more related to humanitarian law and just, you know, individual rights, and that goes from your patient rights and also your civil rights. And there again, we see this connection between the governing bodies, the ones making the laws, and again, what quality of life one has available, whether it be based on the quality of their care, quality of their socioeconomic standing. Social media, although it's something that I've never been a fan of and always hesitated to share, is now serving as a perfect outlet to say some of the things that I want to say and have the potential for it to fall on the ears of those who are making a difference, and have that power right now. We all have our voice, and we all know I have a mouth, and so I'm just here to use it. So that will be the basics of Communicate, a place where I can use my voice and not be faced with the same kind of consequences. It gets a little gray there because during the pandemic, where misinformation became such a hot topic, American Medical Association did come out and say that any medical doctor found like spreading misinformation could lose their medical license. So although I've walked away from any healthcare system, you know, I do still hold license to practice in 2 states. And that is something that I, you know, hope to keep, but it is also something that I don't feel like I have to have in order to make a difference. Something that cannot be taken away from me is my experience and my education. I have a lot to learn still, and I have a lot to lose, but that is the price that one pays for finding your true self. Like what you see, follow my channel at Communicate on YouTube, and join me on this journey as I use my voice to make the change that I'd never been quite able to get to at the bedside. See you next time.